I just want to compliment the previous speakers. Um, and I want to say that yesterday, Judge Napolitano asked me about Scott Ritter. And he said, do you think he has courage? And I said, I know he has courage. I've known Scott closely for the last 2 decades. We've worked together. And courage, as I recall from my scholastic studies, is the basis of all virtue. All other virtue is specious if you don't have any guts, okay? That's why I applaud people speaking out, as Colonel Wilkerson and Helge have already done. And we all need to do that kind of thing. Now, getting back to Scott, I can sympathize with Scott 20 years ago when my profession of an intelligence analyst was prostituted to justify a war against Iraq that was completely a lie, based on lies. There were no weapons of mass destruction or ties between Saddam Hussein and Al Qaeda. And I got really angry, okay? And so did Scott. And I got so angry that I couldn't shake it off. And luckily, I remembered some of my scholastic education. And I remembered Thomas Aquinas saying, don't worry, Ray, anger is a virtue, okay? A virtue, yeah. He looked all around. He was writing about virtue. He was wrong about a lot of things, about women and, all kinds of stuff. But he knew a lot about Aristotle, about virtue. And he said, look, anger is a virtue. There's no word for it in Latin, so I can't really write about it. But the opposite is iracundia, always being ticked off. The other is kind of a milk toasty, timidity. Virtue lies in the middle, in media res, okay? And anger, the virtue of anger is just enough of what you need to be virtuous. Whoa. Now, he quoted John Chrysostom from the early church, that is, Aquinas did, and he said, look, anger is a virtue because it respicit bonum justitiae, because it looks at the good of justice, and if you can live and work without a feeling of justice, you are corrupt, you are sinful, okay? So what does this all have to do? It all has to do with what we, imitating Scott, and saying, there is ample reason to be angry, but, courage, as I said before, both Aristotle and Aquinas said, is the basic of all virtue, and the rest of these virtues, including anger, are specious if you have no guts. Now, proceeding from the sublime to the prosaic is hardly the right word. Will Israel use a nuclear weapon in extremis? That's the key, folks, in my view. And my answer is it probably will. Whoa. Why do I say that sort of thing? Well, there's a military historian, military specialist who is well regarded in Israel and in the United States. As a matter of fact, his writings are right next to Sun Tzu and other big. Who else? His writings are up there against Clausewitz and Sun Tzu, the rest of them. His name is Martin Van Crayfield, and more than 20 years ago, he said this. He wrote this, actually. Our armed forces, he's an Israeli citizen now, Jewish heritage. Our armed forces have the capability to take the world down with us. And I can assure you that will happen if Israel goes under. Whoa, okay. That was a long time ago. Does that still hold? Does the Samson option still reign supreme if the Israelis are in extremis? Well, I asked another well-regarded colonel, not Colonel Wilkerson, but another good friend of mine who knows a lot about this and was in contact with lots of Israeli officers. He said, look, several Israelis have said the same thing as Van Crayfield to me recently. They seem intent on killing everyone in the region with nuclear weapons if their bid to dominate the region fails. So, getting back to courage, will we be virtuous? Will we be appropriately angry? Will we practice the virtue of anger and put courage, the basis of all virtue, behind that, and do the kinds of things not only that Gilroy has just mentioned, but other things that we in our own circumstances, our own milieu, can do effectively? Well, of course we have to do that. And we can't let Scott Ritter stand out there uniquely as a person practicing the virtue of courage, and the rest of us just sit back and look on and say, well, gee, I wish we could do that. We can do that. We need to do that. We must do that. Thanks for listening.